Boruto watched as the Otsutsuki's blade pierced the last shred of humanity's hope. A silent scream tore through space-time, for the end was upon him and no one could believe it. But how did this unending scourge reach such an irreversible point? It all came down to Boruto. The karma pulsed. Mamoshiki's soul screamed. He needed power, and he needed it now. The world was turning to dust, and Boruto felt the weight of every life slipping away. He had failed to protect his friends, his family, his legacy. The village, once vibrant, was now a burning graveyard, for Ishiki had left nothing behind. But the ancestral voice of Momoshiki whispered in his mind, a tempting offer of a power he never would have dared to wield. There was a price, of course. But what if the price of inaction was existence itself? Something had to change for better or for worse. So, Boruto raised his hand, the karma glowing with cruel intensity, for there was no other way out. He invoked the Forbidden Jutsu, a portal to the void, something the Hokage would never dare. The barrier between worlds began to tear. The sky ripped open with a guttural roar, and a greenish rift opened, swallowing the sunlight whole. Piercing winds howled, while debris and chakra swirled around. The dimension seemed to groan in pain, yielding to Boruto's call. From the depths of that shimmering abyss, a figure began to emerge, cloaked in shadows and cosmic dust. Boruto held his breath, for he knew that silhouette. It was impossible, but there it was, the unmistakable outline of the legendary ninja. Boruto's eyes widened. It was Obito Uchiha, but not the Obito he expected. Not the old and tired Obito, but young Obito, at the peak of his power, with the Sharingan pulsing with malevolent energy. And the Rinnegan was there too. He floated, motionless, like a puppet that had just been activated. No emotion, not a hint of consciousness. Just a perfect vessel, an empty shell, for the soul was not present. And Boruto realized the horror of what he had done. The supreme Otsutsuki halted his advance, sensing the new presence, a familiar yet distorted power. He smiled, a smile that sent chills down Boruto's spine. For that god had just gained a new toy, and the next move would decide everything. The Otsutsuki god smiled. It was a frozen smile, promising infinite pain. Boruto saw the end in every inch. Obito Uchiha floated, his eyes empty. He was a husk, a macabre vessel. Boruto felt regret freeze his veins. The Otsutsuki reached out, for the new toy called to him, and the power pulsed. He advanced, slow, but with the certainty of victory, and fear crushed Boruto. Exhaustion racked Boruto. The karma drained his life. He could barely breathe, but he needed to act. Obito didn't respond. He was merely a shadow. Then, without warning, Obito's eyes, now a red Sharingan and a purple Rinnegan, focused on the Otsutsuki. A dark energy began to emanate. It wasn't chakra. It was something older, deeper, an echo of a forgotten curse bubbling to the surface. Boruto realized what Momoshiki had sold him, for the price was being paid. The air warped, and Obito moved his hand, not in a known jutsu, but as if pulling at space-time itself. A gigantic distortion opened, and an eye, like Kagaya's, tried to manifest. The supreme Otsutsuki, for the first time, hesitated. This was unexpected. A variation of Kamui he had never witnessed, a dimension that seemed to swallow everything. Obito had no soul, but the primordial will of that body, now infused with a distorted Otsutsuki power from Momoshiki, acted. It was pure instinct for annihilation. The Kamui's eye expanded, and the Otsutsuki god was pulled, forced into a reality where time and space had no meaning. A prison of pure darkness and void. Boruto watched, exhausted and horrified, because Obito had saved the day. But he felt Momoshiki's presence stronger than ever. And as Obito, the puppet, turned to face him, Boruto knew he had just unleashed an evil far greater. Obito turned to Boruto, and you saw the murderous intent in his eyes, a spark of hatred that hadn't existed in that empty vessel before. The rescue Boruto sought turned into a terrible curse, for he had unleashed a demon that now stared back at him, soulless and unforgiving. A putrid purple energy began to emanate from Obito, dense and distorted, engulfing his body like a dark, sickly mist. It wasn't chakra, but something more profane. Boruto felt an icy-wide dread shoot down his spine, for that wasn't the Uchiha power he knew, but something far older and crueler, a power Momoshiki had implanted. The aura exploded upwards, and you saw a massive, grotesque skeleton taking shape, a Susanoo unlike any other ever seen in ninja history. It was black as the deepest night, with distorted muscles and scarlet eyes, a monster born from the void and primal pain. It was the fury of a lost, but manipulated, soul. But did you really think the Otsutsuki would be caught so easily? The dimensional tear flickered one last time, and he emerged, unharmed, laughing scornfully at the pathetic attempt to imprison him. He was never in any real danger. The god raised his hand, and Obito's Susanoo, that colossal fortress of power, trembled with a strange vibration, then disintegrated completely, evaporating like mist into the air. It was annulled. Boruto watched the total destruction, and he understood that Momoshiki had a much more complex and bloodthirsty plan than he imagined, one that involved Obito in a terrifying way. The Otsutsuki then smiled, and his eyes fixed on Boruto, promising unspeakable pain, for the real game was just beginning, and Boruto was the main piece. And Obito, the puppet who had evoked the ultimate fury of a distorted Susanoo, now hovered motionless again, a harbinger of an even more terrifying fate for all. Boruto found himself alone before an invincible god, with a broken weapon in his hands and a price that needed to be paid, whatever the cost to humanity. The Otsutsuki walked, and you felt the weight of death. Boruto was alone, a broken weapon in his hands, but Momoshiki's instinct howled for survival, begging for a chance. He looked at Obito, the puppet, for he knew there was no other way. It was time to risk everything. The ground trembled beneath the god's feet, and time seemed to dilate, each second an eternity of imminent agony. Boruto felt the pressure of the dimension, and he knew he couldn't endure another moment without desperate action. Boruto's karma pulsed with brutal force, and he extended his hand to Obito, not to control him, but to implant his own will to fight. He sent a shock of chakra, mixed with Otsutsuki energy, a silent scream. A spark flickered in Obito's empty eyes, a brief flash of recognition or ancestral fury. Then you saw the distorted promise resonate with Boruto's desperation. It wasn't consciousness, but an echo. You saw Obito's silhouette tremble, then the inert hand rose, with the Sharingan and Rinnegan lighting up in unison. It was a response, a forced synchronicity between the living and the void, a dance of power. Boruto channeled the karma into his own eyes, mimicking Obito's stance, because he needed to guide that raw power. Then, a gigantic Kamui manifested, not just a portal, but a spatial distortion that devoured light itself. The Supreme Otsutsuki, for the first time, showed irritation. He saw the bizarre combination, a fusion of powers even he couldn't predict, but it was a desperate strike, and he smiled, underestimating the attack. Obito and Boruto, as one, hurled a black sphere of karma through the Kamui, aiming for the Otsutsuki's heart. The dimension imploded on impact, a blinding flash, and you thought it was over. But when the smoke cleared, the Otsutsuki was there, intact, laughing with a husk of Obito Uchiha in his hands, for he had a new weapon, and Boruto had fallen into another deadly trap. The Otsutsuki laughed, and you felt your stomach churn, for Obito's husk was in his hands, and Boruto was a pawn. He looked at you with a cruel smile, victory dripping from every gesture, and the end was nearing, with no chance of escape. But Boruto saw a flicker, a minuscule remnant in Obito's Sharingan eye, for it wasn't Momoshiki's manipulation, but an echo. It was will, something so strong it transcended death, an ancestral spark that terrified the Otsutsuki. Obito's husk trembled, not under the god's control, but from an internal force, a ghostly pulse. The Otsutsuki felt a chill down his spine, dropping the Uchiha's body with a start, for it was impossible. Obito's eyes, Sharingan, and Rinnegan shone with a light of their own, a brutal, pure power that made the air vibrate. He raised his hand, and the space around began to distort, not into a common Kamui, but into an abyss of self-destruction. It was a sacrifice. Obito would implode, taking the Otsutsuki with him to a dimension where not even gods could return. He smiled, a sad and determined smile, for he had a final purpose, and it would be fulfilled. The Kamui became a violet and black vortex, swallowing everything whole, and the Otsutsuki was caught off guard. He screamed, trying to escape, but Obito's dimensional gravity was absolute, pulling him into total emptiness. A gigantic explosion of space-time tore reality, and the Otsutsuki's scream was silenced. Obito was gone, a legendary sacrifice, and you watched the dimension slowly heal with an eerie silence. Boruto fell to his knees because Obito had truly sacrificed himself, but dread struck him. The Otsutsuki wasn't completely destroyed. He had emerged, wounded and furious, with an aura that was now even more sinister. The Otsutsuki's skin cracked, for he shed a shell, and an even more terrible form revealed itself, his eyes radiating a cosmic light. He wasn't just a god, but an embodiment of a far greater power, a primordial evil. The Otsutsuki looked at Boruto, and you felt the weight of the universe. The threat loomed, bigger than ever, and the true enemy of existence had just shown its face. And if you want to know how Boruto will face this cosmic threat, then go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next video. Until next time,